So, when we talk about listening, we do it for a whole bunch of reasons. And why you're listening will sort of impact how you're listening. So if you're trying to get information or understand something new or learn something, then you need to be listening really carefully and really deliberately and really critically. And we're going to talk about how to do that today. It's a skill that is really helpful, even though it seems like, it can happen sort of passively. You can just sit there and you will hear things. Actually hearing and understanding is a skill that's really useful. If you're listening to something for enjoyment, you may be able to listen a little less sort of focusedly. I don't even know if that's a word, we'll use it, and still be able to enjoy yourself. But usually in a work setting, you're not listening to your colleagues because you're really enjoying what they're saying. Maybe at lunchtime they're telling the story, but usually it's because they have information that you need to know. And being able to listen really critically to that will help you get that information and communicate back to them really well. So, when we talk about active listening, it's different from just hearing something going in. So when you're actively listening, you're making a conscious effort to hear the whole message that's been sent. You're focusing for the whole time that you're being talked to. You're trying really hard to understand everything that the person is saying. So you need to be paying close attention to the person while they're speaking, and you also need to be signaling that you're paying attention so that they're looking for the prompts, they're understanding what you're understanding and what you're not understanding. So when you're actively listening and you're giving those signals back, it becomes a form of two-way communication. So instead of just one person talking to you and you kind of just staring blankly at them or looking at your cell phone or doing whatever else you want to do, it becomes a form of two-way communication where they're doing most of the information giving, but they're receiving signals back from you. And that makes it much more likely that you're going to retain the information that's been given to you, so you're going to remember what's been said, but also that they're going to be able to give you information that's helpful. So they'll be able to understand easier what you're getting and what you're not, or if they've said something that doesn't make sense, they'll be able to change that. And so it increases as well that chance of having good, clear communication. And it cuts down on some of those barriers to communication that you talked about with Joelle last week. So passively listening is something that you don't have to practice. Your ears work regardless of whether you are focused on them or not, and sound travels in and is processed by your brain. But actually critically listening and remembering and understanding is something that you can practice and improve at, and is a really useful thing. So, skill number one is paying attention. So there are some things that you can do that help you, no problem, to do that and improve your ability to pay attention. It's really important because if you're thinking about other things at the same time, you're less likely to remember things, but also because non-verbal communication is really important. So somebody's body language, their facial expressions, gives off as much information about what they're trying to say as their words do. And you can't pick up on that if you're not looking at them. So things like looking at the speaker directly rather than staring off somewhere else, deliberately trying to put aside other thoughts that might be distracting you. So at work, realistically, you'll usually have lots of different things going on. So just trying to put that to one side and focus on the task that you're doing at the moment, which is getting that information. Avoid being distracted by things going on around you. So that's things like cell phones or laptops or other people who may be distracting you. On a build site or on a work site, there could be lots of other things going on. And if you're the manager of that site or if you're in charge of other people, you may need to still have a peripheral awareness of what's going on, just to make sure people are behaving themselves safely and sensibly, that sort of thing. But you want to avoid being distracted by that. And you want to listen to people's body language. So listen, obviously not with your ears, but pay attention to it and think about it deliberately. So for us, as sort of a younger generation or in the workplace today, often it's quite acceptable to have, your smartphone, and you'll end up doing potentially work from it. You'll take it on site to do your emails and things. So it's not necessarily super rude if you're in a casual meeting or you're talking with someone and you check your phone because an email's come through. It might not be, that won't be appropriate in all situations. We talked about in meetings and things, often it's not. So it's not so much that you're going to be very rude there, but it will reduce your likelihood of remembering what's been said. It distracts you from what you're doing and from getting that information. So just being really deliberate about paying attention will improve that a lot. So then the other part of active listening is giving that feedback that you're listening. So showing that you're listening. So your body language is really important for this, and it can affect the speaker. So small gestures like nodding or looking interested, facial expression, keeping your body language open. If you put your head on your desk and things like that, clearly you're not listening, even if you kind of still are. That changes the way the communication goes. You can use like semi-verbal prompts, so those sort of noises that let people know you're listening but don't interrupt them. And if it's a conversation where you're going to have to go away and do things based on it later, in particular, if you're talking with your boss and they're giving you a list of things to do, then taking short notes is a really good option. Obviously, if it's a more formal conversation or meeting, then taking minutes, like we practiced earlier, will give you the sort of depth that you need. But if it's a sort of just a short list of stuff, then notes will be a really helpful way to remember it all. And then that way you've heard it and you've written it down and you've seen it because you've looked at it while you're writing it. And that'll really help you remember because you've had it 3 times at that point instead of just 1. So notes can be really, really helpful. Providing feedback as well. So because active listening is that two-way communication, you want to have some feedback in as well. So because your personal views can distort how you hear things, it's good to ask clarifying questions. So if somebody has a different view to you, then when they're explaining things, it's likely that you'll put emphasis on things that they may not put emphasis on. Or you might interpret what they're saying differently because what they're actually saying seems like strange and irrational or seems wrong. So you kind of put a spin on it that makes it seem better to you. So clarifying questions like what I'm hearing is XYZ, is that what you meant? Or what do you mean when you say this? Means that you can be sure that you both understand what's going on. So it's a really common technique when you're interviewing clients, in particular new clients. If you're trying to find out what they expect out of a job, then those sort of questions are really important. Because often people, when you ask them back to them, kind of change slightly or tweak slightly what they've said. They might want you to focus on something that they didn't make it very clear at the beginning. They might want to add things in. So those sort of questions are particularly useful in that context. Okay. Also, deferring judgment. So if you keep interrupting people while they're talking, it's usually a waste of time. So partially because often they'll answer your question by the time they get to the end, and partially because it kind of frustrates the process. So you should allow people to kind of finish the point they're on before you ask questions. Don't interrupt them to tell them why they're wrong, and don't just sit there and in your head prepare reasons why they're wrong, because the time you spend doing that is time you spend not listening to what they're saying. So overall, communication is worse because one person is communicating and the other person is ignoring what they're saying in order to prepare what they're going to say in response to the thing that just happened. So when you're listening, and I mean, obviously if somebody's been talking at you for like 40 minutes, probably there's a point in there where you need to stop and ask questions and clarify. But you want to make sure, just like you would want people to give you a chance to sort of talk about your ideas properly, that you do that for them as well. So that improves that two-way communication, and it really helps. And when you're questioning things, it's really important that you're respectful. So like we talked about with the business correspondence, when you're writing like with a legitimate complaint or there's a problem that you need to be fixed, it's okay to say things like, I didn't like the way this happened, or I think this policy is wrong, or I think there's a problem here. But you need to do it in language that avoids being like overly emotive. So I think Steve is wrong and an idiot and shouldn't be hired here, or things like that. So it's the same when you're using listening skills. So you do want to be open and honest in your responses. If somebody's telling you something and you really disagree with it, it's fine to say so. You don't just have to be like, oh, yes, I agree with everything you say. Because then, in terms of a workplace, that's not really very helpful. Otherwise, the first person that speaks, there's no point in anybody else saying, we'll all just agree and we'll just do whatever the first person wants. And that probably won't lead to jobs being done well or people feeling like included in the work environment. So if you disagree with what's been said, or you think you have a better idea, be honest about that, but be respectful about it. So again, avoid using like overly emotive things. Try and think about ways that you can take into account what they're valuing, even if you use sort of a slightly different process to make things happen. So kind of treat the person the way you think they'd want to be treated or the way you'd want to be treated. So respectfully, but you can disagree with people, obviously, and you should feel comfortable telling them so in a respectful way.